Let's discuss unconscious patterns of self-sabotage, how we stop them, how we keep moving ourselves forwards despite these unconscious patterns. Let's indeed. Yeah. What's the problem with these situations? I know it's obvious to say that, but yeah, why is this self-sabotage pattern not great for us, Rachel?
Yeah. So when we're talking about compulsive behaviors in training, specifically what we're discussing is leaderboarding. So either during the open or competitions or within your, a lot of gym software now is an app on a phone and you can check other people's scores. You can even like them, which we can also talk about the dopamine that occurs there, and making comparisons in general, even on, an actual physical whiteboard. There is often we see a compulsive need to check the whiteboard and check the leaderboard. And the reason that this is self-sabotaging and harmful is because it's creating an addiction to the information that's provided. And because it's not information that we have control over, I don't control whether or not I beat somebody else in the gym. I control whether or not I give my best effort. And sometimes that'll be winning, and sometimes it'll be coming up short. Because I don't have control over that, I've now handed over my happiness to somebody else, my contentment and satisfaction. And the thing is, what we learned about dopamine with Anna Lemke in this podcast is if I get that low, if I don't see the ranking that I want, I then want it even more. And sometimes that leads us to work harder. And sometimes it leads us to just check more compulsively. And that disconnect is what leads to overtraining, burnout, like we talked about last week.
Yeah. So what's important there is like this can be a serving thing. We can use it. Like the gamification of everything now can be used really well if it's used intentionally. But when it's used unintentionally and it's just happening to us, that's when things get a little bit dangerous for us. And that's when it can lead into these unconscious patterns and unaware patterns of disruptive behaviors. So we have this like leaderboarding effect. Maybe this is just me talking about me, but I see it in a lot of people as well. The phone use thing, like finish a set of weightlifting, get on your phone. It's
You're
like
right on
this
that
ingrained pattern.
Instagram scrolling. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've realized once I was scrolling through an Instagram feed that wouldn't load because I was in an underground gym. And I'm like, what am I doing here? This is completely pointless,
I've
futile
lost my
activity.
mind right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah. I
insane.
need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. So these are the two big ways that I see self-sabotage and kind of those compulsive behaviors in training showing up. Are there any other ways that you see things going on there? Nutrition's probably one.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to talk about in nutrition. Restricting diets compulsively is definitely a big problem, especially among women, because we're taught not to eat enough, honestly. Um, we can also see this in um, like compulsive training in general. So the inability to take an unplanned rest day. You can also see it in compulsive behaviors around improvement. So dedication and persistence are really positive qualities, but we can also turn them against ourselves in like a punishing way. So it's, I didn't do snatches right in the workout, so I'm going to make myself snatch after this workout, and if I don't get it right, I'm going to be pissed off at myself. Like that's just a really shitty way to feel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. Exactly right. What I found incredibly interesting throughout Anna's podcast was
Mhm.
she just these nuanced bits on dopamine. I think most people are aware of like, oh, dopamine's like the feel good thing.
Yeah.
You do things when and sorry, dopamine's released and it feels good.
Yeah.
But a few kind of nuanced things changes everything
Hmm.
around. It's around the expectation of reward, not the reward itself. So when your body's expecting, or when your mind and brain are expecting a reward, that's when there's a little squirt of dopamine. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
that's going to feel good, so I'm going to keep on doing that.
That was
I'm going
super
to
graphic.
rephrase what squirts. Yeah, I can't remember what I heard the other day, and I was like, oh, and then it's obviously seeped into. But yeah, let's not use that again. And it's just like all it's doing is it's making you likely to repeat this. It's making you
Hmm.
kind of, you're just, okay, I'm more likely to perform this behavior in the future. That's why it's there. That's
Yeah.
the main reason it's there, to kind of reinforce these strategies. And evolutionarily, great, like, because the berries were scarce, like
Yes.
everything was
You had to keep looking for
exactly.
pleasure. Exactly.
Yeah, we were in a scarce environment, whereas now everything is abundant.
Yeah.
May not feel it because
Yeah.
of our neurochemistry, but like, you know what? It is abundant. Life is pretty good right now.
Mhm.
So it's like evolutionarily wise.
Yeah.
And these kind of small things that I found very, very useful, especially when it comes to changing compulsive behavior around training, because it's like, okay, I'm doing this because I'm expecting a reward. There might not actually be a reward coming. This might just be a trick in my biological makeup.
Yes.
Mm.
Mm.
So with that, what are the kind of, we've done why is leaderboarding harmful?
Mm.
What about numbing behaviors? What about things that we
Mm.
do that numb?
Yeah. Social media is a big one. And honestly, we could call leaderboarding a numbing behavior as well, right? Like when we feel discomfort or a kind of lowness, we'll often seek a high. So that seeking is the dopamine. And so when we experience that compulsion to scroll through social media, to check the leaderboard again to see if maybe our ranking went up, or to see if we got more likes on a post on social media, or to check our weight again. That's another
Mm.
one, checking weight compulsively. Um, when we do wait, I forgot the question.
And numbing.
Numbing. Let's
Yeah.
talk about numbing.
Yeah.
So when we do those things compulsively, um, that numbing behavior, turning away from the discomfort, actually reinforces the behavior, the numbing behavior,
Mm.
when what would be more serving is to sit with the discomfort instead and examine why the discomfort exists.
Mm.
So if I'm in the gym, I'm checking my app to see, all right, like how did I stack up today? I felt and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this. You finish a workout and you're like, I crushed that. Like I know that I left it all out on the floor. I did awesome. And you look because you're like, ooh, I want to see how bad I crushed it. And you look and a few people beat you. And suddenly the workout that you felt so good about, it doesn't feel so good anymore. Now you feel like crap.
Mhm.
So you've checked it and you've completely changed your neurochemistry because you checked. If instead we can learn to accept our effort as being enough rather than needing that external reward, that external praise, uh, we'll find ourselves just much more content with training. And Anna talks about this. There's a reason that we compare and leaderboard. It's because we are seeking belonging. We're neurologically wired to try to belong and to be a part of a tribe. So that evidence is being sought through the leaderboard, through likes on social media, through being a certain weight.
Mm.
But we can
Eh,
actually find belonging in much more serving ways, namely by connecting with people on an authentic level. But it's harder,
nice. Yeah, way harder. It's so
way
much
harder.
easier just to double tap a heart-shaped button.
It sure is.
Way easier. It doesn't work. Effort over outcome. That's the key takeaway I got from that. It's like, okay, let's learn learn the skill, which is a difficult thing to do,
Yeah.
of appreciating effort
Mm.
and not just the outcome. Incredibly difficult thing to do, but it's definitely possible.
Yeah, it's practiced. It's
Yeah,
definitely a practice. Yeah.
exactly.
And she outlines a way to do that. So we can talk about that too.
Yeah, there's a few elements, and we go through the dopamine acronym. There we go, we got the right word.
Acronym.
We went
Yeah.
through the dopamine acronym within the podcast, but there's a few key points that really overlap so neatly with the Mindset Rx method and
Yes.
this process of change that I think it's worth um, pulling them out and talk about how we work with that at Mindset Rx and see how
Yeah.
we can guide some athletes towards growth here. So
Mm.
the first the first section of the Mindset Rx method is testing, right? It's like it's figuring out where we are right now. And that comes up in three parts of the dopamine acronym. First one of those is data. So when we talk about gathering data about our mindset and gathering data about our behaviors, how would you recommend athletes start with that?
The easiest way to do it is by writing it down either in a paper journal or in a document that you can keep in, your Google Drive. Something that's
Mm.
searchable can actually be really helpful. But that ability to find total honesty with ourselves first, and then also with other people, owning up to what we've been doing, that brings our unconscious behaviors and thoughts and emotions to consciousness, and bringing it to consciousness is how we do testing.
Yeah, we're starting to get scientific about this. We're stop relying on hopes and we're saying, no,
Totally.
I'm going to become scientific. I'm going to see this as objectively as possible. And it comes down to the whole point of the testing phase, which is, can I see myself and the world as objectively true as possible? So we're seeking truth,
Yes.
not what we hope is the case or not what we're used to believing is the case.
Yes. Ooh, there's definitely something to that, right? Like you really have to be willing to accept that maybe this was in Richard's podcast. Seeking truth means that you have to be willing to accept that you might have been wrong before.
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, really
And
uncomfortable.
let's probably say that we probably are wrong in so many ways of what we're
100
doing.
ways.
Um,
100.
but that is just 100,
Yeah.
exactly 100 as well. That is, yeah, like, and even if we build things out, like that is how you find growth in any area, whether it's politically, whether it's in terms of training, whether it's in terms of relationships, whether it's in terms of businesses, your like whatever it is, like it's what is the truth? How can we find the truth? And it's no different with compulsive behaviors. It's like, what am I doing? And like, how can I gather data about it? So how often am I checking my leaderboarding app? Maybe I clock how many times I look up to see the leaderboard in my training session.
Yeah.
Maybe I look at my phone use and pull up that app that shows you how much time you're spending on it each day. Yeah.
That is always upsetting for everyone.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
The worst thing you want to do then, and probably the best thing in the long run, but the most uncomfortable thing is multiplying that out over a year. It's like, okay, if I try times this by 52, how much of this year did I spend looking at Instagram? And yeah,
Shit.
yeah. And then and then it gets even worse. If I transfer that out over the entire, like, what is my expected lifetime?
Yeah.
That is really, really sad.
Um,
Like,
many of
incredibly
those
sad.
many of those digital well-being or screen time apps will also show you how often you open apps, right? So I opened this app 5 times, right? So that's another way to gather like data on this. How many times am I opening my
Yeah.
my whiteboard app? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think from a mindset perspective as well, that writing shit down, observe your inner athlete, as we call it, the more you can check back in and watch and look at what you've written and try and mine the details from it, mine the data from it. It's like, okay, this phrase is coming up time and time again. This
Mhm.
feeling, this emotion, this physical sensation is coming up time and time and time again. And that is then, it's a data point. It's a subjective data point, but it's still a data point. It's like, this is
Yeah.
what I'm experiencing multiple times.
I think too, one of one of the pieces of the dopamine acronym is the P for problems. Like, what are
Mhm.
the negative consequences of me doing this? Right?
Yeah.
Because we can say all we want, like you opening Instagram 30 times in a day is probably wasting your time. What are the actual negative consequences of that? Not just in wasted time, but in how you feel. I
Mm.
100% guarantee that not all 30 times we open that app do we feel better afterwards. More often we feel worse.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's just the short-term consequences, and the long-term
Yes.
consequences can be even more important. There's
Yeah.
this I think something that people get wrong with mindset on a consistent basis
Yeah.
is that we have to be all rainbows and unicorns about things. It's like, oh, just focus on the positive side of things, and like, oh, just don't even, and like, just aim at what you could be in every, and like, there's nothing wrong with that, being positive about things. Like, obviously, I'd rather be a little bit more positive than a little bit more negative,
Yeah.
but the carrot and the stick provide equal motivation, and
Mhm.
sometimes you really have to look reality in the face and see how uncomfortable it's going to be if
Yeah.
you are ever going to do anything about these dopamine loops, about these non-serving behaviors.
One of my favorite questions to ask myself is, if you keep doing this or if you don't change this, what's your life going to be like 6 months to a year from now?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to feel about that? Like, that can be
Mhm.
a really scary question.
Yeah, really, really good question. It
Yeah.
forces you to confront reality, because that
Yes.
will be your reality in a year's time, and you've got
Yeah.
a chance
Well,
to do something about it now.
right. Exactly.
The other part of this, of the testing phase that overlaps so nicely with the dopamine acronym, is objectives.
Yeah.
Like, what are your objectives for doing this? Like, what are you trying to get? What are you trying to
Yeah.
feel? Are you
Yeah.
trying to numb yourself, like we've spoken about before, or are you trying to address a feeling of inadequacy?
Mm.
Or you, like,
Yeah.
what's the emotional driver behind it?
Yeah.
And there might
Did
be a
it
physical driver
used to
too.
motivate you? And that's why you
Yes.
keep doing it, but it doesn't motivate you anymore. That's definitely a thing. Sometimes our behaviors are initially adaptive and then they're not in the long run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's so true. We grow.
Yeah.
And
Right.
like time is another, oh god, here we go, right into detail. Time is another dimension that's just as valid as space.
Yes.
So we've got to recommend that whilst we're moving through space, we are, or recognize that whilst we're moving through space, we're also moving through time, and we're in a
Yeah.
very different place. We're in a very different experience.
Mm.
So as an athlete, that means that you've got to recognize that you are a different person than you were 3 years ago, and you will change. Hopefully you will change, and you have changed, and time has changed, and you're in a different environment. That quote around no man stands in the same river twice, because the river is different and the man is different. Like,
Yeah.
there, you're a different, like, you're a different human being. You have different, slightly different drivers. There's a baseline, but the world is different too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
So we have the testing phase. That's really the first thing in Mindset Rex that we do. We start
Yeah.
with testing. We really do a lot of these things. We gather data, we look for objectives, and we isolate the problems that are
Yeah.
going to come about from these behaviors.
Mhm.
That's really a big step in this.
Yeah.
Then I think presence is a big piece as well. We can talk about aiming up, and I think absence is a part of that. But I
Yeah.
think presence is a big thing here. And Anna talks about mindfulness.
Mm.
How do you begin working on mindfulness with athletes, Rachel?
Mm.
Mhm. And just chuck that problem on you.
That's so uncomfortable for so many of us. Mindfulness and presence uh, require the very difficult ability to sit with discomfort. So it's essentially learning to tolerate suffering rather than running away from it in some way, either by seeking dopamine um, or by numbing in some new way. That's often what happens. We might give up social media, but then all of a sudden we're like watching TV more.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're constantly seeking this new entertainment distraction from reality.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But learning to tolerate um the feelings of discomfort that lead to the seeking of numbing is really important. And I think this is where Anna talked a little bit about this. What she said was when we numb or try to escape from suffering, we also escape from meaningfulness and purpose. So you can't have it both ways. And Brene Brown talks about this in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. We can't experience, or excuse me, we can't numb discomfort or suffering without also numbing our ability to feel joy. So you either numb everything or you feel everything. So you can either choose to live a life that exists in this very narrow band, or you can experience the full spectrum of human suffering and joy. There's no way around that. But mindfulness requires us to be able to sit still, and so meditation is a really good but difficult project to take on. But honestly, we can practice mindfulness in very small ways too. Like rather than going through the motions while preparing a meal, attempting to prepare a meal with full presence in what we're doing. So, and even eating a meal, feeling the weight of the fork in our hand and taking a bite and chewing it before swallowing it rather than shoveling it in, which is what I do. But actually tasting our food and thinking about how it tastes and setting the fork down in between bites. We can also do this with training. So,
Mm,
stepping into the gym and being fully present in what's going on rather than thinking about everything that's happened in the past or everything that's going to happen in the future. Takes
mm,
practice. Takes practice.
yeah.
But meditation is a nice tool for this because you're technically taking yourself away from all of the distractions that make it difficult to build the skill. And you can meditate for 2 minutes and get something out of it.
Yeah, especially initially, like that
Yes.
all you're trying to do is build the ability to be aware of exactly what's happening on. That's what you do. You're
Yes.
just like, okay, what's happening? What am I
Yeah.
feeling? Like just looking, just watching, you're becoming the observer. I actually
Mhm.
put out in the email that I put out today.
Yeah.
If you're going to wash the dishes, just wash the dishes. That's all
Yeah.
you're all there to do, rather than complaining about like, oh, what am I doing here? Like,
Mhm.
oh, I hate doing this, such a waste of time, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
Just get on with it and
Yeah.
see it. Like that is a useful moment to train your mindfulness. And we
Mhm.
don't have to be sat in lotus position in a saffron robe with incense burning to meditate.
Yes.
Like we
Yeah.
can.
In a perfect room. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's fine. The
Yeah.
dog is often in my lap while I'm
Hmm.
meditating. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a
And not in a
walking
cute way.
there's a walking meditation you can do, which is just
Oh,
you're walking around and you just become aware of what reality looks like. It's like, okay, what am I seeing right now? And where am I in this world? And if you
yeah.
just keep on walking around and looking around at what's happening and really thinking, what is it like for me to experience this? You are getting the
Mm.
benefit of meditation, and that
Mm.
will
Yeah.
transfer to so many different areas. So you have that mindfulness piece.
Mm.
And then when it comes to actually abstaining from those actions that aren't serving you, you
Mm.
have more awareness of the subtleties of emotion and physiological change that are going to lead you into that rut of non-serving behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for bringing up the physiological change because that's what's going on. Like that like craving to check the leaderboard or to check our weight. That craving is um it's chemical.
Mm,
It's dopamine. So if we can learn to just say like this is just dopamine, I can sit through it and it will pass over time. If we can learn to abstain from those things, then eventually the chemical wears off.
yeah, exactly right.
Mm,
Exactly right.
yeah.
So, in summary, is there anything else you want to add before I wrap up?
I think the last piece of dopamine is really important. Experiment. It's okay for it to be a little sticky, to fall off the wagon is human. Um, and just trying things is worthwhile because that is what uh, leads to growth is trying things and failing and trying again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in summary, then, these behaviors that are compulsive are preventing our progress through making us feel shitty in a lot of
Yes.
ways. They're
Yes.
wrecking the kind of the balance of our minds, and they're causing us to do things that don't serve us time and time again, and don't move us forwards, whereas we could be investing that energy otherwise. And the way we're going to overcome that is by firstly testing our mindset. So gathering data, what are the objectives of this behavior and what problems is it creating, and like how am I numbing this, and then developing this mindfulness around this. So developing presence, and yes, we want to create a vision of who you can be without this and create goals and all this kind of thing, but that mindfulness piece is key, and we're going to
Yes.
do that through kind of, yes, meditation is a good tool and it's a great tool, but it's not the ashram version that I think we've all been led into believing
Yes.
it is. So
Yeah.
we become mindful, we become aware of what's happening right now, and that leads to us becoming aware of the subtleties of emotion and physiology, which means we can enact change.
Yeah. Absolutely.